Greetings, weary time traveler. Tonight you're not some battle-scarred veteran, nor a silk-clad noble, not even some disease-ridden beggar pleading for crumbs. You're something far worse, something actually useful. You're the headsman, the law's necessary evil, kept at arm's length yet close enough for the gawking masses. No flowing robes for you, no fancy titles, just splintered wood and cold iron as your communion with the divine. You don't sign the death warrants, you're the period at the end of the sentence. And when the spectators wander home, when the priests retreat to their candlelit sanctuaries and the magistrates toast to their own righteousness, you're left alone with stains no amount of scrubbing removes. The blood may not be yours, but it clings to your hands like shadow. Before we begin this grim tale, do me one small kindness. Let me know where you're listening from and what hour your local clocks show. I always find it fascinating to hear where these stories find their audience. If you'd like early access to more of these melancholic historical vignettes, ad-free audio versions, or simply wish to support the narrative, you'll find our Patreon link waiting in the description below. But for now, recline comfortably, let your muscles unwind, and allow our story to unfold. You weren't born to kill, but starvation wasn't in your destiny either. In your corner of this merciless world, those two fates might as well be twins. Your family once practiced an honest trade. Your father worked leather, teaching you the precise arts of skinning, cutting, scraping, cleaning. Yet the townsfolk always held their breath around him. After his passing, their gazes turned calculating rather than kind. A position needed filling. And here stood a young man who already knew his way around a blade's edge. No one actually says the word aloud at first. They don't need to. You notice it in the pregnant pauses before greetings, how the baker's loaf grows mysteriously smaller when he thinks you're not looking. The once friendly priest starts forgetting your name during sermons. Friends evaporate like morning dew. One by one, they stop visiting until you become that stained people work around rather than confront. Even the stray dogs give you wider berth. The realization dawns quickly. They've already decided your role, whether you accept it or not. It begins with a favor, it always does. The magistrate finds you outside the tannery, arms slick with lye, and asks if you'd assist with a burial. Not a proper Christian one. Some nameless thief left dangling from a tree branch too long. No priest will touch him, no family claims him. But the flies have grown thick and children have started gawking. They need someone with a strong stomach. You agree because no stopped being an option long ago. They give you a coin, then another, then a name. The second favor cuts deeper. This time the body still radiates warmth. A heretic, they claim, though his slack features show no signs of heresy. He's tied to a post behind the jail, shirt stiff with dried blood, eyes open and clouded. The previous executioner either drank himself into permanent tremors or retired. Stories vary. His replacement hasn't arrived, but the crowd's already gathered. Someone must finish the job. It wasn't meant to be your duty, but your choices stopped mattering long ago. You take the axe. The weight surprises you. Your hands betray you with tremors. When the deed is done, when the head tumbles like overripe fruit and the crowd gasps, you feel something. Not guilt, not pride, just a hollow silence where something human used to reside. You tell yourself this might be the end of it, a one-time necessity of circumstance. You return home, scrub your hands raw, wait for the shame to rinse away. It doesn't. Instead arrives a wax-sealed note from the town clerk. Not gratitude, confirmation. They voted behind closed doors. The position is yours. The pay's meager, but they'll house you. A small stipend for tools, extra coins per service rendered. Their phrasing, in the interest of civic continuity. You stare at the words until they blur. Part of you wants to tear the paper. Instead, you fold it carefully. You attempt refusal. Don your least stained tunic. Hold your head level. Explain politely that you're unqualified, that a trained professional would better serve. The clerk doesn't disagree, just folds his hands over his belly and says something peculiar. People don't want a stranger wielding the axe. They prefer someone familiar yet already distant, someone they've conditioned themselves to avoid. Better the devil they've already sidelined than a new face to distrust. You nod slowly. Something fractures in your throat. Not grief, just grim understanding. 2 days later, your name appears outside the church, official executor of sentences and civic punishments. The ink runs in the rain. A boy points and laughs. You say nothing. Returning home, you find a satchel by your door, gloves, a whetstone, liquor strong enough to strip paint from wood. Also a rusted key to a shack near town's edge that now bears your name. No neighbors, no candlelit windows nearby, just crows, a latrine with a broken door, and a chopping block bearing last season's stains. That night you sit on your new bed studying your hands. They look unchanged. They always will. Yet something about them feels different now, heavier, or perhaps prematurely aged. You flex your fingers, imagining what skills they'll need to learn. Where to aim, how much force to apply, how to keep steady when 100 eyes lean forward in anticipation. The realization strikes like a hammer blow. This isn't just employment. It's your sentence, not for the condemned, but for you. Morning brings a name, a coin purse, and the weight of permanent exile from humanity. You tuck them all into your coat without asking who the man was or what he did. You'll learn soon enough. You always do. No one trains you properly. There are no instruction manuals, no diagrams passed down through generations of professionals. If there ever was an executioner's guild, it dissolved with the last man who cared enough to organize such things. The town gave you the title, but none of the technique. They assume you'll figure it out, or at least not botch the job when nobility's watching. That's the unspoken rule. Peasants can die messy, but nobles demand clean work. The first weeks pass in a fog of anxious improvisation. Mornings are spent oiling tools you barely understand, nights staring at your warped reflection in a rusted blade, searching for some sign of certainty that never comes. Instead comes a quiet knock at your door and a pig. Not alive, not whole, just the upper half dumped in a sack by a red-faced guard who avoids eye contact. Practice, he mutters before leaving. The sack leaks as you drag it inside. For days you swing, first just to find the rhythm. You think that matters. Raise, feel the weight in your shoulders, bring it down hard into flesh. It's messier than expected, less theatrical. The spine doesn't always yield. Sometimes the blade strikes true and the head lolls satisfyingly. Other times it wedges stubbornly, forcing you to work it loose while blood pools between your boots. The pig never complains. That's your only comfort. After 3 pigs and 1 unfortunate goat, they decide you're ready for human flesh. Not fresh. This man's been dead 2 days in the jail, taken by fever before the news could. No sense wasting good rope on a corpse, so now he's yours. They strip him, tie him to a post behind the chapel, far enough that townsfolk won't complain about the stench. You stand frozen for an hour. Respect? Hesitation? Maybe both. You're unaccustomed to studying a man's face before cutting it. Slack-jawed, gray at the edges, old bruises mapping his skin like continents. You nod as if apologizing before swinging. The first strike misses entirely, glancing off his shoulder and biting into the post. The second lands shallow. It takes 3 more before the head finally drops. No triumph, just sickness. You sit beside the remains fighting nausea. The observing guard leaves without comment. Later, you hear his report to the clerk. He'll do. You experiment with different blades, curved, flat, one with a notch that catches unervingly in flesh. You sharpen, resharpen, test weights by feel. There's no one to ask. The previous executioner drank himself blind, his tools either stolen or rusted to uselessness. In a monastery archive, you find an old Latin diagram showing spinal strike points. It's vague, likely drawn by someone who never held an axe. Still, you memorize it, not because it helps, but because it's all you have. Sometimes guards bring condemned men early, for efficiency. They claim, though really it's so they don't have to handle the aftermath. You try to make it quick. Brace the neck against the block, ask about last words. Most spit, some pray. One boy, barely older than you, looks up and says, "Make it look good." You try. You miss. The second blow finishes it. You bury him yourself, hands shaking throughout. Other towns have proper training programs, even send executioners abroad to study under French or Italian masters. Not yours. Your town has budgets and priorities. They're content with occasional pigs and prayers. You learned through failure, not the apologetic kind, but the kind that bleeds. You build a dummy from straw and old linen, fashioning a neck from bundled reeds marked with red chalk. Hours pass in repetitive swings until your arms go numb. You talk to it sometimes, practicing lines, "In the name of the law," or "May God have mercy." It feels absurd, but better foolish here than before a jeering crowd. You drill grips, one hand low, one steady. You perfect your stance, your footwork, the blade's descent angle. Gradually, it becomes a trade, the only way to survive. One morning, the clerk visits. There's to be a public execution, your first. A thief who murdered a merchant's son. A popular case. The crowd will be large. You ask for more time. He shakes his head. The noose is ready, the platform built. Just make sure the head comes off clean, he says. They'll forgive anything except mess. Then he's gone. The night before, sleep won't come. Your hands twitch in dreams. Dawn finds your knuckles aching. You clean your axe 3 times, dress in your least stained coat, and walk to the square with your hood low. The crowd's already forming. Mothers with children, vendors hawking roasted nuts, old men reeking of wine. They shout names, wages, curses. You stand behind the block and wait. The condemned is young, sharp-eyed, defiant. He spits and shouts about justice. The crowd laughs. You stay silent, guiding him to the block. He resists slightly, but you've learned to press at the next base, not the top. The axe feels heavier than usual. Your palms sweat. For a terrifying moment, you're certain you'll miss. You don't. The head rolls clean, mouth frozen open. The crowd gasps, then cheers. A woman faints. A man claps. You don't look at them or the head. Just wipe the blade and leave before anyone meets your eyes. Later, they'll call it a fine performance, professional, efficient. They'll forget your name by nightfall. That first public execution goes better than expected, mainly because the man didn't scream. After that first execution, the names keep coming, steady as the seasons, inevitable as rot. The work settles into your bones like winter's chill, gradual, numbing, impossible to shake. Crowds keep gathering, magistrates keep nodding, and you keep showing up. Over time, you grasp the unspoken truth. The killing is barely half your duty. The real art lies in choosing how. Not every neck deserves the axe. Some are meant for the noose, others for the sword, the fire, the wheel. The punishment isn't just about pain. It's theater, symbolism, a message carved in flesh. You're no longer just a tradesman. You're a curator of death's methods, and each tool speaks its own language. An executioner without proper tools is just another hated man. You hold no sacred vestments like priests, no badge of office like magistrates. Your authority comes from iron and rope and flame, and knowing precisely when to use each. Your work is measured in fractions of seconds, inches of bone. The difference between a clean job and public disgrace often comes down to how your wrist turns on the follow-through. The axe remains your constant companion, the first image people conjure when they hear your title. You maintain several, 3 functional, 1 ceremonial. The primary one has a heavy curved blade and a wooden shaft that perpetually smells of mold no matter how you scrub it. It doesn't gleam, it simply bites deep and true. You oil it religiously, hone it with a whetstone worn smooth from use, testing the edge against leather until it slices without resistance. A dull axe means cruelty, loud, slow, messy. You avoid that when possible, though some days the choice isn't yours. The sword emerges for special occasions, when nobility must die. Lords and ladies demand dignity, clean lines, grace. The mayor himself gifted yours, a narrow executioner's blade with no point, designed solely for neck severing, not battlefield stabbing. You rarely use it, but when required, everything changes. You dress finer, speak softer, hold the hilt just so with a slight bow before striking. The sword cuts no deeper than the axe, but it performs better for audiences. The blood sprays the same, but for them, it's all pageantry. You're merely stage dressing for some grand morality play. Then there's the rope, common, cheap, efficient. The choice when corpses need no presentability. You've hanged thieves, poachers, debtors, heretics, adulterers, some guilty, some not. The noose doesn't discriminate. You've learned to tie the knot yourself, tight enough to hold, loose enough to snap the neck properly. Too short a drop means slow strangulation. Too long risks decapitation. That happened once. You still dream about it, though the crowd cheered. They always do when things go wrong. Afterward, you measured more carefully. Slept less. The garrote serves for quiet, clinical endings, used in back rooms away from spectators. Typically for spies or madmen the court won't publicly burn. You've employed it twice. The metal collar tightens via a screw until the throat collapses. It takes longer than anyone admits. The second victim wept throughout. You vowed never to use it again, yet it hangs on your wall, just in case the law demands otherwise. The wheel predates most buildings in your village, an ancient, brutal relic rarely used now, partly due to expense, partly because modern tastes reject prolonged endings. But occasionally, when power wants to make a statement, you dust it off. A cartwheel mounted on a frame, the condemned splayed across it like a starfish while you methodically break bones with a hammer before weaving limbs through spokes. Never quick, never clean, never necessary, but profoundly effective messaging. They often leave the remains displayed for days afterward, a warning nailed to the very air. Fire remains the oldest tool, reserved for heretics and witches, anyone the church wants to make an example of. You don't light the pyres, that duty falls to priests or trembling altar boys, but you bind the wrists, arrange the kindling so it smolders slowly. They claim this allows time for repentance. You know the truth. It gives crowds more time to watch. Every tool carries meaning. The axe for punishment, the sword for ceremony, the rope for routine, the wheel for terror, fire for faith. You've become more than a technician. You're a stagehand for morality, plays no one admits buying tickets to. You start keeping meticulous notes, with types, blade angles, drop heights, wound depths. Not because anyone asks, but because it creates illusion of control. You record how long different ropes take to fray, how head roll distances vary with neck muscle tension, how long screams last before asphyxiation. An unorthodox scholar studying limits rather than laws. No one wants to hear this macabre research, of course. When tavern patrons ask your trade, you lie, claim to work timber or metal. They nod and scoot down the bench. You drink alone, sharpen blades alone, walk markets with hood raised. The town pretends you don't exist until they need you. Then suddenly they know your name. Briefly, once, a magistrate's clerk asked if you'd consider traveling to other provinces. They lacked skilled hands, and your record was clean. You declined, not from loyalty, but knowledge that tools don't change, nor the work, nor the loneliness. Geography can't erase what you are, the man who knows precisely how much pressure severs a cervical spine. You'd still receive the same silent treatment. The cruelest realization? How naturally these tools become extensions of yourself. You feel naked without the whetstone, unsettled without the axe's weight. Your fingers trace rope coils at night checking for fraying, even with no hanging scheduled. Your hands know their duties before your mind catches up. Some nights you dream in shapes, the blade's curve, the sword's edge, the wheel's terrible circle. You wake grasping for tools that aren't there, reaching for ritual, for the job that only ends when your own name appears on the chapel notice board with an execution time beneath it. And even then, someone else will swing the axe. The axe stays sharp. The block stays wet. The noose stays ready. You inhabit a house no one visits. Not because it's haunted, though children whisper it is, but because it might as well be. Perched alone at the village edge, too distant for chapel bells, too close to the burial grounds to forget your purpose. The thatch leaks. The hearth smokes when rains come. Moss creeps across corners while drafts slip through floorboards. No amount of blankets defeats the chill. But it's yours, or more accurately, the town doesn't charge rent. The shack came with the job, not a gift, but compromise, shelter that offends no one's conscience. You didn't choose it, but made it yours in small, invisible ways. Keeping the kettle clean, patching the roof thrice, installing a hook for your coat. You tried planting onions once, but the sour, shallow soil rejected them. Your bed is straw with a wool blanket so thin wind laughs through it. The pillow holds sawdust and regrets. You wake stiff each morning, joints protesting louder each year. A three-legged table leans drunkenly in the center. The chair squeaks louder than most men do mid-execution. You eat there alone with a tin spoon and wooden bowl, usually barley or turnip stew thickened with stale bread. Occasionally a generous guard brings salted pork. Once, miraculously, a whole chicken. You remember that day like a holiday. The well stands 20 paces from your door, farther in winter when the path ices over and your patched boots fail. You draw your own water, chop your own wood, cook your own meals. Sometimes you say your name aloud just to remember how it sounds. The villagers never approach, not for repairs, not for charity, not even gossip. You've fallen off the social ladder entirely, just a death-shaped errand dressed in man's clothing. When you walk through town, conversations pause just enough to notice, not dramatically, but like a throat tightening before stepping aside. They nod if forced, never smile. Children look then look away. Dogs growl. Shopkeepers place goods on counters without touching your hand. Coins are taken in silence. When you leave, brooms emerge, gentle sweeps as if your footprints need sanitizing. You've learned to take back lanes past tanneries and middens. The stench doesn't bother you anymore. It smells like honest work, like things with purpose. Occasionally you catch your reflection in a window pane and don't recognize the face. Not because it's changed much, but because it's become something people avoid looking at. Even your reflection seems reluctant. There are moments, small, forgettable, when you wonder about ordinary life. Sitting in taverns without empty benches forming around you like moats. Laughing too loud without the room going still. Touching someone's shoulder without them flinching as if grazed by death itself. But then the wind shifts, carrying the metallic tang from your boots, and you remember, no amount of scrubbing removes this stain. The priest visits monthly, not for confession, just bureaucratic necessities. He stands at your doorway with folded hands and pursed lips, declining tea with practiced politeness. You ask if the bishop ever responded to your inquiry. He always says no. You know what he's thinking, whether men like you have souls worth saving, whether mercy extends beyond the scaffold. You want to ask, but don't. The silence suits you both. Your dreams have transformed. Once mere echoes of daylight, now they've grown teeth. You dream of rope burns and wooden wheels, of pyres that never extinguish and screams that never fade. You wake clutching your throat, heart hammering, breath held like you're the one on the block now. The flask by your bedside helps, just enough to blur the edges until dawn reminds you you're still breathing. Most days, that's the only confirmation you get. The tools hang on your wall like crucified sins, arranged meticulously. Blade, rope, garrote, hammer, sword. Each with its designated place, its unique weight. Sometimes at night you run calloused fingers along their edges, not testing sharpness, but reassuring yourself they're still there. They've become more reliable company than neighbors, quieter than friends. They never look away when you speak. You've stopped attending festivals, even the rare occasions you're invited. Last time you went, you lingered at the crowd's edge while others danced in drunken circles, laughing into their cups and pretending the world was kind. No one invited you to join. A child pointed. His mother pulled him close. You left before they broke bread. On the way home, you stepped in something foul and didn't bother scraping your boot. Why bother? The stain never really leaves anyway. You keep a journal, not daily, just when thoughts grow too loud to contain. Mostly lists, names, dates, weather conditions, how long each body took to die. You don't record their crimes, just the moment they ceased being problems. You're not sure why you keep it. No monastery will preserve these pages, no library display them. Perhaps it's just proof you existed, that someone, somewhere, kept count. You've noticed your shadow changing, longer, slightly hunched, as if the work is reshaping you from within. Your posture has curved. You stoop now even without weight on your shoulders. Fingers twitch when idle. Eyes flinch at sudden movements. You've become the monster from children's bedtime stories, and still expected to arrive punctual, sober, with clean blades. There are good days, you don't speak of them, but they exist. A fresh loaf left anonymously on your stoop. A fire that burns clean without smoking. Those rare moments in the woods behind your shack where birds forget what you are. You sit on a stump, coat pulled tight, watching trees sway, not thinking of gallows or names, just breathing. Then comes the knock, the summons, the name, the hour. You don your coat, check the axe, step into boots, and roll simultaneously. The house becomes memory again. You return to being what the town requires, but won't name once the blood dries. That night you return, hang up the blade, peel off stiff clothing, sit at your crooked table with barley porridge and something bitter in a tin cup. The window shutters rattle. The walls answer. You chew slowly, staring at hands that look identical to yesterday's, yet somehow feel borrowed. Peasants die screaming. Nobles die performing. That's the first distinction you notice. It's never about pain. Everyone feels steel the same. But peasants curse and flail. They beg or spit or collapse like sacks of grain needing dragged back to the block. Nobles, they make speeches. They wear linen shirts costing more than your annual wages. They want their deaths remembered, which requires you to vanish into the scenery. Their executions must be pristine, dignified, beautiful, like tragic final acts in plays that were always destined to end this way. You don't choose who dies, the courts decide that. But you notice how methods shift based on social standing. A starving peasant stealing bread from the bishop's pantry gets the noose. Quick, dirty, over before breakfast. A merchant who offended the wrong official might get the garrote, discreetly, behind closed doors. But nobles, even those convicted of treason or murder, always get the sword. Always. They don't die on common blocks either. Too vulgar. Instead, you use the low scaffold, 4 steps high, draped in black, velvet curtains if budgets allow. The condemned kneels on fine cushions, hands bound in silk cords, eyes lifted skyward as if awaiting applause. There's usually a priest, sometimes a bard to record final words. A herald announces the sentence in trembling tones. And you, the nameless, faceless mechanism, stand behind the noble with sword ready, hooded if requested. Some prefer it that way, can't bear seeing your eyes when they go. Others demand to look directly at you. You're never sure which is worse. You rehearse these deaths, literally. The day before a noble execution, you're summoned to the magistrate's hall to practice. Timing, footwork, posture. Enter from stage left. Bow without slouching. Raise the blade at precisely 45 degrees. Wait for the signal, usually a nod from some ring-adorned official. Then strike once, only once, in perfect silence. No grunts, no stumbles, no blood on the cushion if avoidable. You've practiced on watermelons with eyes closed. Studied vertebrae diagrams drawn by men who've never wiped gore from their boots. Nobles die how they lived, convinced they're starring in history. They speak of legacy, duty, forgiveness, invoking God, country, and family in the same breath. Some weep, but never before the audience. One kissed his signet ring and gave it to his mistress. Another requested his favorite psalm, then recited it himself when the priest forgot the words. You're never part of their narrative, yet always hovering just off stage, blade raised, awaiting your cue. When the head drops, they cheer or weep or throw roses. Once, someone threw coins. You didn't pick them up. You treat noble executions like surgeries, laying out tools beforehand, checking grips, testing balance. You measure scaffold heights, inspect for loose boards, avoid one the night before. The sword tolerates no errors. One bad strike and you'll never hear the end of it. Not from the crowd, not from the bishop, certainly not from the family who'll swear they saw eyelids flutter as the head rolled. You've seen what happens when executioners miss. You've been what happens. Peasant executions differ entirely. No rehearsals, no silk cords, no eloquent last words worth carving in marble. They die in mud or behind jails or beside ditches that save gravediggers' effort. Crowds still come, not for ceremony, but sport. They throw rotten fruit, place bets on whether the rope will hold or the head will bounce. No need for bows or clean gloves here. But stumble? Let the blade stick? Have the news snap? The crowd turns instantly. Peasant or noble, audiences demand blood that meets expectations. Yet paradoxically, you observe something profound. Peasants die afraid. Nobles die convinced, not of innocence, but significance. They believe their deaths mean something, prove points, alter histories. Maybe they're right. Maybe noble heads roll farther. But you're the one who picks them up afterward. The one who scrubs blood from stage edges while crowds disperse. The one who watches the next sunrise like nothing happened. You've started maintaining two tool sets. One for rabble, one for spectacle. The axe for mobs, heavy and impersonal. The sword for theater, gleaming and precise. The noose always at ready. The garrote rarely mentioned. You store them separately, not from superstition, but respect for the craft, not the condemned. They made you justice's hand. Might as well keep the instruments clean. Occasionally, after particularly elegant work, someone acknowledges you, not directly, but with a nod, a discreet coin, a wine-loosened word from a clerk. You're not supposed to exist post-execution, but sometimes they recognize the craftsmanship. Sometimes when noble families request proper burial preparations, they ask for you specifically. He would have preferred it that way, one widow said, eyes hollow. You didn't know if she lied. You complied regardless. But gratitude's fleeting. Perfection's expected. Failure's unforgivable. You've seen executioners exiled for misaligned swings, for screams lasting too long, for daring to show their faces. One man you briefly knew was hanged with his own rope after botching a baroness. You never asked details, just practiced more, gripped tighter, hoped no one noticed your mornings starting with tremors. You're paid double for noble deaths, unofficial policy. The coins come in folded cloths, never counted aloud. It's understood that stylish killing costs more. The irony? When things go wrong, when nobles twitch or swords drag or cushions stain, you're the villain again. The failed professional. The faltering instrument. The blade that showed disrespect. Paid double to kill artfully, then blamed when the poetry fails. The crowd's never satisfied. They cheer. They jeer. They spit. Some days they pelt you with turnips. Others it's just pebbles, small enough for officials to ignore. The crowd never satisfies. They chant. They cheer. They spit. Some days they hurl turnips. Others it's just stones, small enough to escape official notice. They arrive hours early, long before the scaffolds swept clean and the condemned let out. Children in tow, wine in hand, knives ready to peel fruit while waiting. Execution day functions as a sanctioned holiday, blessed by the church, fueled by collective hunger that never truly fills. You've learned to sense their mood like sailors read the sea. Some come for justice, others for entertainment, many just for distraction. Famine years bring louder laughter. Harsh winters sharpen curses. When taxes rise, they jeer more viciously. When a noble escapes punishment, they demand blood from the next beggar sentenced. You're not the source of their anger, just the pressure valve when it boils over. The moment they all lean forward. Proof someone will pay, even if it's the wrong someone. The worst isn't the violence, it's their expectations. They don't want mere death. They crave death that makes them feel something. Catharsis, vindication, joy. You must deliver it cleanly yet with enough spectacle to justify their time investment. Too fast. They boo. Too slow. They scream. If the condemned doesn't beg or flail or shout something scandalous, restlessness curdles into rage. They want narrative. And you're the punctuation mark. You've witnessed decent folk turn feral before scaffolds. The baker who sharpened your axe once. The carpenter who fixed your door. Now grinning like wolves, shouting things they'd never say in church. The crowd's anonymity transforms people. They want to see bodies twitch. Blades stick. To tell neighbors, I was there, with morbid pride. You recognize the regulars. The woman with a mole above her eye who always brings a child, even for female executions. The one-toothed walnut vendor who sings filthy rhymes during waits. The boys daring each other to touch the block before you arrive. You perform competently. Hands steady. Words minimal. Blade clean between uses. Same code. Same measured pace. Let the condemned speak if allowed. Nod to the priest. Wait for the signal. Swing. When done cleanly, they forget you, cheering for the drama but not the stagehand who enabled it. There's no glory in flawless work, just absence. But miss? Let the rope break or axe catch or screams prolong. Suddenly, they remember your name. Stories spread. Embellishments grow. You're called drunk, sadist, monster, coward. Children reenact your failures in streets. He swung like this. One mimics with sticks, then missed and hit the shoulder. Laughter follows. The tale crystallizes until it's the only version remembered. Your first botched execution wasn't entirely your fault. The man twisted, a guard slipped. You hesitated. The blade struck wrong. 3 more blows finished it. The silence afterward proved worse than any jeering. Their gazes changed, like you dropped a platter at a feast, spoiled something sacred. You buried that one yourself, digging until blisters formed, desperate to do something right. Next day, the butcher's boy joked behind your back. The lesson crystallized. It didn't matter. You strive for invisibility, dull colors, lowered face, nods without greetings, leaving before crowds disperse, avoiding markets on feast days. None of it helps. They recognize you anyway. Point. Whisper. You become not just feared, but storied. The man who needed 5 swings. The one who dropped the sword. Who made the Duchess faint. Only one's true, but truth bows to legend. Magistrates don't care if paperwork's clean. Priests mutter about forgiveness. Guards keep distance, not from anger, but habit. Your movements grow deliberate, slower, more careful. Extra time checking tools. Doubled sharpening sessions. Practicing swings before dawn. Rehearsing footwork in sleep. Anything to prevent another mistake. Yet you still wake wondering if today's the day the mob turns. You've seen it happen. Crowds boiling over not from the condemned's actions, but unmet expectations. Once in a neighboring town, they dragged the executioner off the scaffold and beat him to death with his own tools. Another time, someone torched the platform after a too quick hanging. There's a madness that grips people when cheated of their spectacle. You've started listening beyond words, to the crowd's tone. Not their vulgar chants, but the undercurrent. You discern when they hunger for pain versus boredom versus desperate righteousness. Adjust accordingly. Speak louder. Give more time. Step aside strategically so they lean in. It's not compassion, it's crowd control. You're not just killing a person, you're directing a performance where the audience is the real danger. This wears on you. Not the blood or bones or screams, the crowd. Their need, their glee, their rage. You've become a mirror for their worst selves, giving what they demand while they reward you by pretending you're air until you falter. Then suddenly you're unforgettable. You walk home through trees now, the long way past the cemetery where fresh graves still smell of turned earth. Hood up, shoulders hunched, blade wrapped like a shameful wound. No cheers follow, no nods, no gratitude, just the persistent ache in your spine and boots on gravel. At your door, silence drapes over you like a second coat. The house creaks greetings. When peasants die, they scream. When nobles die, they perform. That's the first distinction you noticed. It's never about pain. Everyone feels steel the same. But peasants curse and flail and collapse like grain sacks needing dragged to blocks. Nobles, they make speeches. Wear linen shirts worth your annual wages. Want deaths remembered, which requires you becoming scenery. Their executions must be pristine, dignified, beautiful, like tragic final acts in predestined plays. You don't choose who dies, courts decide that. But methods shift by social standing. A starving peasant stealing bishop's bread gets the noose. Quick, dirty, over before breakfast. An offending merchant might get the garrote, discreetly indoors. But nobles, even murderous ones, always get the sword. Always. They don't die on common blocks, too vulgar. Instead, the low scaffold, 4 steps, black drapes, velvet curtains if budgets allow. The condemned kneels on cushions, silk-bound hands, eyes skyward like awaiting applause. Priests and bards attend. Heralds announce sentences with trembling import. And you, the nameless mechanism, stand behind them, hooded if requested. Some can't bear seeing your eyes when they go. Others demand to look directly. You're never sure which is worse. You rehearse noble deaths, literally. Summoned to magistrate's hall beforehand to practice. Timing, footwork, posture, interstage left. Bow without slouching. Raise blade at 45 degrees. Wait for the ringed official's nod. Strike once, silently. No grunts. No stumbles. No blood on cushions, if avoidable. You've used watermelons for target practice. Studied vertebrae diagrams drawn by men who've never cleaned gore from boots. Nobles die convinced they're starring in history. They speak of legacy, duty, forgiveness, invoking God, country, and family simultaneously. Some weep, never before audiences. One kissed his signet ring into his mistress's palm. Another recited his own psalm when the priest forgot. You're excluded from their narratives, yet always hovering off stage, blade raised, awaiting cue. When noble heads drop, crowds cheer, weep, or throw roses. Once, coins. You didn't take them. You treat these executions like surgeries, tools prearranged, grips checked, balance tested. Scaffolds measured, loose boards inspected, wine avoided beforehand. The sword tolerates no errors. One bad strike, and you'll hear about it endlessly, from crowds, bishops, families swearing they saw eyelids flutter post-decapitation. You've seen executioners ruined for less. You've been the consequence. Peasant executions differ entirely. No rehearsals, silk cords, or eloquent last words. They die in mud, behind jails, beside ditches convenient for gravediggers. Crowds still come, not for ceremony but sport. They pelt you with rotten fruit, bet on rope integrity, laugh at bouncing heads. No bows or clean gloves required here. But miss? Let the blade stick? Noose snap? The crowd's mercy vanishes faster than blood dries. Peasant or noble, audiences demand blood meeting expectations. Yet you've observed something profound. Peasants die afraid. Nobles die convinced, not of innocence, but significance. They believe their deaths mean something, prove points, alter histories. Maybe they're right. Maybe noble heads roll farther. But you're the one who collects them afterward, who scrubs blood from stages while crowds disperse, who watches sunrises like nothing happened. You've developed two tool sets, one for rabble, one for spectacle. The axe for mobs, heavy and impersonal. The sword for theater, gleaming and precise. The noose always ready. The garrote rarely mentioned. Stored separately, not from superstition, but respect for craft over condemned. They made you justice's hand. Might as well keep the instruments clean. Occasionally, after particularly artful work, someone acknowledges you. Not directly, but with nods, discreet coins, wine-loosened clerk's compliments. You're not supposed to exist post-execution, but sometimes they recognize craftsmanship. Sometimes noble families request you specifically prepare bodies. He would have preferred it, one widow said, hollow-eyed. You didn't know if she lied. You complied regardless. But gratitude's fleeting. Perfection's expected. Failure's unforgettable. You've seen executioners exiled for misaligned swings, prolonged screams, face revealing. One man you briefly knew was hanged with his own rope after botching a baroness. You never asked details. Just practiced more. Grip tighter. Hope no one noticed your worsening tremors. You're paid double for noble deaths. Unofficial policy. Coins arrive in folded cloths, never counted aloud. Stylish killing costs more. The irony? When things go wrong, nobles twitch, swords drag, cushions stain, you're the villain again. The failed professional. The faltering instrument. The disrespectful blade. Paid double to kill artfully, then blamed when the poetry falters. The crowd's never satisfied. They cheer. They jeer. They spit. Some days it's turnips. Others just pebbles, small enough for officials to ignore. You often wonder if the law calls it justice. Does that sanctify it? The magistrates say yes. The crowd couldn't care less. But the priest, the one who should know, never gives a straight answer. He administers last rites to the condemned. He delivers sermons to the living. He comforts the grieving. But when it comes to you, he offers nothing at all. The priest gives final blessings, but never to you. He kneels beside the doomed with cross and holy water, murmuring Latin phrases he's repeated 1,000 times. He blesses the forehead, the chest, places 2 fingers on clammy skin, and whispers a name that no longer matters. Sometimes the condemned weeps. Sometimes they flinch. Sometimes they go still as if the blessing itself is a kind of death. Then the priest stands, gives a solemn nod, and steps aside. That's when you step forward. He never looks at you as you pass. Never. It wasn't always this way. When you first took the job, he offered you a blessing, a small one, for strength and clarity. Said it with a tight smile, like a man offering ale to someone he doesn't trust. You bowed your head. We're grateful. He avoided you for 3 weeks afterward. And when you asked quietly, respectfully, whether absolution applied to executioners, he gave an answer you still turn over in your mind. We pray for all souls, he said. But not all souls ask to be forgiven. Sometimes you wonder if you're meant to request it, whether there's some special confession reserved for men like you. Something buried in a different book, kept in a separate drawer, never spoken aloud. You know what the church teaches. The law is sacred, the king divinely ordained. The justice you carry out is his, not yours. But when you're scrubbing blood from your hands with icy water and no one meets your eye, it's hard to believe you're part of any divine plan. And when the priest avoids your home, avoids saying your name, avoids even uttering amen in your presence, you start questioning who's deluded, him or you. You sit in the chapel's back sometimes, just to remind yourself the roof hasn't caved in. You arrive late, leave early, never approach the altar. You kneel behind a wooden pillar where candlelight doesn't quite reach, watching others pray. The cobbler, the widow, the girl with a cleft lip who sings off-key. They never look your way, never have to. You've become part of the chapel's architecture, a shadow in the corner, the necessary cost of living in a world that demands both mercy and punishment in the same breath. There are patron saints for everything: soldiers, thieves, lost children, hopeless causes. You checked once, out of curiosity. No saint watches over executioners. The closest you found was Saint Dismas, the thief crucified beside Christ. Not terrible company, but hardly comforting. You light a candle anyway, not for yourself, but for those who looked you in the eye, who smiled or joked or forgave you when they had no reason to. You don't remember all their names, but you remember how their heads tilted, how the ropes creaked, the silence that followed. The priest never invites you to confession. You stopped asking years ago. When you speak to God now, it's in your own voice. No Latin, no kneeling, just muttered words before sleep. A thanks if the blade struck clean, an apology if it didn't. You tell yourself he understands, that he sees the difference between murder and duty, that he knows how desperately you wish someone else had been chosen, that he sees the days when your hands shake and the nights when your dreams smell of ash and bone. Sometimes you imagine judgment, not the fiery, horn variety, but something quieter, a room with no doors or windows, just a table and a voice asking, "Do you remember them all?" You don't know what you'd say. You don't know if that voice would be kind, but you think about it often, when your heart won't slow, when you wake grinding your teeth. You keep a list, names, dates, towns. Not what they did, just when they died. You don't know if it counts as penance, but it feels like something. There are moments when you envy the condemned. Not their fate, but their ritual. They get final meals, final prayers, whispered assurances that God awaits them. They're given moments to be human, to be mourned. You are not. You're what happens before morning begins. The one who holds the blade and therefore forfeits blessings. You've watched priests absolve men who confessed to killing children, burning farms, slitting throats in alleys. The same words each time: forgiveness, redemption, peace. You've never killed anyone unsentenced, never taken a life outside the law. Yet when your name surfaces in sermons, it's only as cautionary tale. Even the hand that strikes for justice, the priest says, must answer for its violence. He never looks at you when he says it. He doesn't need to. On All Souls' Day, the bells toll for the dead. You wait to hear one for yourself. Just a slip, a mistake, a single clang for the man who died by degrees without being seen. The bell passes you by. It rings for merchants, for children, for the abbess who died praying. Never for executioners. You tell yourself that's fair. You weren't expecting sainthood, just acknowledgement. You drink that night, not to forget, just to soften the quiet. There's a story the priest tells every spring. The thief who repented at the last moment, the soldier who lowered his spear, the criminal who kissed the cross as flames reached his feet. These are meant as hope, as last chances. But you started hearing them differently. You wonder what story they'll tell about you, if any, or if you'll dissolve into myth. The faceless man in the black hood never offered salvation because no one thought you needed it. Sometimes when the condemned asks for prayer and no priest arrives in time, you murmur one yourself. Not aloud, not properly, just half-remembered words from childhood as the rope tightens or the blade lifts. It feels foolish, but wrong to do nothing. You don't know if God hears. Don't even know if you're saying it right. But the dead deserve something, and you're the only one left to give it. You've considered writing to the bishop, not for recognition, just clarity. Drafted the letter 3 times, then burned each in the hearth. You already know the answer. If God's watching, he's watching from very far away. And if he speaks, he does so in silence. You whisper the prayers yourself now, just in case. All the executed leave something behind. Blood, obviously, that's the most visible. It pools, clots, seeps between floorboards if not cleaned quickly. You've developed routines. Wait for crowds to disperse, fetch pail and brush. Sometimes a guard helps. Usually not. Scrub until wood lightens, until flies lose interest. Wipe the axe clean, rewrap the rope, toss soiled cloths into fire. You used to gag. Now you just hum. Some leave teeth, hair, bone fragments if the swing goes wrong. You don't mention these to magistrates. Just collect what you find and bury it behind your shack. A small pit, no markers. Whisper something over the soil, not because you think it helps, but because silence feels worse. You've buried 100 pieces of strangers and can't remember which belong to whom. But you remember the earth's weight as it falls. The bodies, when unclaimed, become your responsibility too. The jailer helps haul them off the scaffold, but after that, it's on you. Drag them to the cart, cover with a sheet if available, wheel them to the cemetery's edge where unconsecrated ground begins. Sometimes they're dumped in mass graves, sometimes burned. Depends on the weather. Depends how many others died that week. Depends how much pity the priest can spare. Usually not much. You've learned to wrap corpses tightly, not just for dignity, but to keep limbs from shifting. Nothing worse than a hand slipping out mid-transport, brushing your leg like it's asking for something. You sew the shrouds with rough twine, not because ordered to, but because it feels right. It's the only stitch of care most will receive. You've become a default undertaker, not from kindness, but necessity. Burning takes longer. Stack wood high and dry. Build the pyre tight. Do it wrong, and the fire eats slow and foul. Do it right, and it still smells like boiled leather and marrow. Stand downwind when possible. Doesn't always work. Smoke seeps into your coat, your hair, your throat. You've stopped trying to wash it out. Just wait for it to fade. You keep a second shirt now, one reserved for pyre duty. Stored in an outdoor box. The neighbors wouldn't touch it if paid. Sometimes families come, not often, but occasionally a wife appears red-eyed with burial cloth. A brother stands aside, arms crossed, face pale with something between grief and fury. You let them take the body if asked. Help lift it into their cart. Say nothing. They rarely thank you. You don't blame them. Once a mother tried to strike you. Her hand shook too much to connect. You let her try anyway. Not everyone gets proper rest. Some are dumped in pits, one atop another, lime sprinkled to hasten rot. Others burn until only teeth and belt buckles remain. A few lie too long when no one can be bothered to finish. You've seen bodies blowed in summer heat, bones exposed to crows, faces eaten away before the spirit cools. You do what you can. Bury what's left. Burn what won't rot fast enough. Work quickly, otherwise the stench seeps into your pores. You tell yourself it's not your job to mourn. Your duty is to clean, to dispose, to prepare for the next. But some nights you find yourself talking to them quietly while sewing shrouds or wrapping limbs. Things like, "You won't be alone," or "It's done now." Not prayer, not pity, just habit, like brushing soot off a coat or nodding at a stranger. Some part of you needs this, to acknowledge the human that existed before the verdict. You've developed rituals, not official, not blessed, just yours. You tie ropes a certain way. Hold hands just so. Close eyes if they're still soft enough. If not, drape a cloth over the face. You hate how they stare. Clean under fingernails if time allows. Remove gags if present. Brush hair back. Tell yourself it's not affection, it's presentation. But sometimes it feels like penance. There's a shelf above your bed for tokens. Not trophies, just things left behind. A torn ribbon, a copper ring, a carved button. You don't know why you keep them. Can't remember which body each came from. But throwing them away feels wrong. So you line them up, dust them weekly, let them sit. Quiet reminders of quiet endings. No one else will remember. Someone should. You don't discuss this with others. Wouldn't know how. No one asks what happens after the axe falls. They assume bodies vanish, blood dries on its own, the dead bury themselves. You let them believe that. It's cleaner. Let them think you swing once and walk away. Let them believe death is simple. You know better. You know how much work disappearance requires. You dream more now, not of dying, but of the dead. Not screams or blood, just faces, eyes, lip curls, hand twitches. You wake with fingers curled like you've been tying knots in sleep. Check corners, half expecting shadows still sitting there. Keep water bedside. Sometimes it helps. You dream of the ones who had names, who looked you in the eye. You didn't write the law, just enforced it. That's what you say when silence grows too loud. What you repeat when the priest avoids your gaze and neighbors cross themselves as you pass. You didn't decide who lived or died. Didn't sit in judgment. Didn't issue sentences from cushioned chairs in warm halls. You just did what the parchment said, what the magistrate signed, what the church stamped holy. The rope, the blade, the fire, they weren't yours. You just happened to hold them. It works most days. The separation, the compartmentalization. You build mental walls, rooms to move through. One for morning rituals, boiling water, folding cloths, checking axe edges. One for crowds. They're jeering, laughing, gasping. One for the swing itself, a moment locked away, separate from before or after. Then another room, darker, where everything else goes. The trembling, the second thoughts, the memory of a man mouthing, "Thank you," before you struck. That room stays locked mostly, but the door creaks. You've stopped talking aloud to yourself. That was a bad habit from your first lonely winter, muttering phrases while pacing. Sometimes prayers, sometimes instructions, sometimes just your name so you wouldn't forget how it sounded. One morning, a laundress heard you through the door, dropped her basket, and fled. Word spreads fast in small towns. Now you keep conversations silent, internal. Nod instead of speaking. Write things down instead of asking. Feels safer. You drink, not heavily at first, just enough to sleep when dreams repeat. Tell yourself it's for the ache in your hands, the tension in your jaw, the grind in your knees from hauling too many bodies in too much rain. Practical, medicinal. Buy cheap red wine from a vendor who never meets your eyes. Drink from a chipped mug you've had since before this began. Sip slowly. Listen to fire crackle. Watch shadows flicker across ceilings. Pretend you're elsewhere. The wine helps. Blurs edges. Muffles names. Dreams lose color. Vivid reds and yellows fade to washed out grays and browns like old murals scraped too often. Faces in dreams lose detail. You recognize who they were, but their mouths no longer move. Their eyes no longer follow. It's a mercy, one you're not sure you deserve, but take anyway. Some nights you abstain, just to see if you still can. Light a candle. Sit by the window. Listen to wind rattle shutters. Watch your hands tremble and tell yourself it's the cold. Focus on your breathing. The chairs creak, your knuckles cracking. Recite psalms you don't believe and imagine they're working. Sometimes they do. Sometimes you lie awake till dawn, too tired to cry, too numb to move. You've started speaking less, even when necessary. Give instructions with glances. Nod instead of answering. Let guards fill silences with crude jokes and hollow laughter. Smile when required. Look stern when expected. Become something quiet, heavy, solid. People treat you like a tool, and you find yourself becoming one. defined by function, maintained only as long as you're sharp. It's easier than pretending to be a man. You tell yourself this is the cost, that every trade has weight. The blacksmith bears burns. The farmer bears blisters. You bear blood that never washes out in silence, growing heavier each year. You try measuring it, naming it, believing it's survivable. But some days it feels like a second skin, damp, clinging, impossible to peel away. You used to imagine what your life might have been before the work, before the shack at the town's edge. A small shop perhaps, shoemaking, tanning, cart repair. Something simple, something normal. But that version of you has grown distant, faded like ink left in sunlight. You don't think of him often now. When you do, it's like remembering a character from someone else's story. You wonder if he ever truly existed. You wonder if his hands would have remained kinder. Passing mirrors has become an exercise in avoidance. Not from shame, but from lack of recognition. The lines beneath your eyes have deepened. Your posture sags. Your mouth sits flatter, not sad, not angry, just blank. Worn down like river stones under relentless current. You've stopped attempting smiles when unnecessary. The muscles resist now. It feels dishonest. You've considered quitting, just leaving the tools behind, walking until roads become forests, disappearing where no one knows your name. But then what? No other trade awaits. No town wants what you've become. You'd starve, or beg, or worse, get caught, and wind up on the same scaffold you once stood beside. That's the cruel joke. The man who swings the axe doesn't get to run. He just keeps swinging until someone younger, steadier, colder takes his place. So you remain. You sharpen blades. You tie knots. You light pyres and scrub blocks, and whisper prayers you stopped believing long ago. You open the ledger. You mark the names. You nod to the priest. You hold the line. The wine helps, but not every night. Some nights the house creaks too loudly, and the silence presses too close. You sit by dying fires, staring at the same knothole in the wall for hours, waiting for the stillness to shift. It never does. No one knocks. No one visits. You haven't had a guest in years, wouldn't know what to offer if they came. The cupboards hold only dried barley and salted meat. The best chair has a crack running through one leg. You only ever light one candle. You don't live alone by choice. You live alone because everyone else decided that's where you belong. The house stays quiet. Always too quiet. You talk to the fire sometimes just to hear a voice. Even that feels like trespassing. You stopped writing letters. There was no one left to send them to. Even the priest no longer stops by. The town delivers your wages by leaving them on a stone by the chapel door. No note, no message. Just a coin pouch, and maybe some insane gossip tucked inside. At first, you tried keeping the place tidy. Not for pride, just to give your hands occupation. You swept. You patched the roof. You straightened books on the shelf. Even the ones you couldn't read anymore because the ink had faded or the Latin never stuck. But over time, you stopped bothering. The dust always returns. The wind tears shingles loose as soon as you nail them down. The garden never took root. The well runs dry sometimes, and when it does, no one brings water. Laughter carries from the village occasionally, not cruel, just ordinary. People living, talking, passing bread and jokes across tables you'll never sit at. You don't resent them for it, but it hollows you nonetheless. You've learned to stop listening, shutting the shutters early, letting darkness settle before voices reach your ears. Your name isn't spoken unless someone's been arrested. That's when guards come, sliding notes under your door without knocking. No eye contact, no words, just the sentence, the date, the method. They assume you'll be ready. You always are. The house has become part of the process now, as forgettable as the rope or the block. A grim little box that produces death on command, then fades back into the landscape like it was never there. You sometimes wonder if it'll outlast you, if the wood will rot before someone tears it down, if the floorboards will keep groaning underfoot long after your boots stop pressing them. You've started marking days on the wall, not to count them, but to prove they happened. The chalk fades quickly. Dampness creeps in. Sometimes you redraw the lines. Sometimes you let them go. There's a corner by the hearth where the tools used to rest, back when you needed them close at hand. Now they stay in the chest by the door, wrapped in cloth, the lock rusted shut. You no longer check them nightly. You know their weight, their feel, how often they haunt your thoughts, even when you're sitting perfectly still. That's enough. No one steals from your home. Not because it's well guarded. It's not. But because no one wants to touch anything that touched you. Once, a child dared another to knock on your door. He made it halfway up the path before turning back, pale and shaking. You watched from the window, unseen. Next morning, someone had scratched a mark into your post. 3 lines crossed by 1. You don't know what it means. You didn't wipe it away. The house smells of old wood and ashes. A hint of vinegar where you scrub the counters. Metal from the tools. Damp from the leaky roof. Your coat never fully dries in winter. You hang it by the fire and sit close, knees pulled up, pretending you're somewhere else. A tavern, a library, any room where people might say your name without disgust or fear. You know it's pretend. You do it anyway. Sometimes the wind blows the shutters open. The sound makes you flinch. You reach for a knife without thinking. Not because you expect danger, it's just instinct. You live like a stray dog guarding bones no one wants. The hearth's warmth never reaches the rest of the house. You keep the door bolted even when home, especially when home. You've caught yourself speaking aloud in empty rooms. Not conversation, not anything meaningful, just words, names, phrases from books, things you remember from before. They sound strange now, like someone else is saying them. You stop when the silence grows too loud again. The worst part? How familiar it's all become. The silence. The distance. You no longer flinch when townspeople turn their backs. No longer expect replies to greetings. You've forgotten what surprise feels like when kindness comes. You don't anticipate visitors. Wouldn't know how to welcome them if they came. The only time you see another's face up close is when it's about to die. You once left bread on the chapel steps. Anonymous, wrapped in cloth. A thank you, perhaps. An apology. You never saw it again. The next week, a dead crow appeared on your doorstep. Not fresh, not accidental, arranged almost artistically, wings folded, eyes missing. You buried it without comment. Didn't try again. You've become your own weather system. Cold in mornings, damp in the bones, silent by nightfall. You track seasons by how the wind howls through cracks in your walls. You know when to light fires early, when to brace the door, when to keep the candle dim so no one remembers you still live here. You don't lock the tool chest every night anymore. Used to out of habit. Now you wonder, what would it matter if someone took the axe or rope? Who'd use them? Who'd want them? The town has made its position clear. They need you, but only from a distance. Only when necessary. Only when no one else wants to touch the blade. There's no family waiting at your table. No voice asking when you'll be home. No second pair of boots by the door. You once thought that might change, that you'd grow into something more than this. But the work leaves no room. It takes slowly, quietly, without violence, just emptiness shaped like duty. You speak less each year, and the house listens more. The condemned make requests sometimes. Some ask for speed, others for slowness. Not many, but enough that you notice patterns. There's a pause when they look you in the eye, when they realize yours is the last face they'll ever see. That pause, whether brief or lingering, tells you more than any prayer or curse ever could. You learn to recognize it, the way jaws tighten, fingers twitch at bound wrists, how some nod, not to you, but to themselves. You stand quiet, steady, listening to whatever they offer before the final silence. They don't always beg. In truth, most don't. They ask questions instead. Will it hurt? Will I be buried with my brother? Does the priest really think I'm damned? You answer when you can, truthfully when possible, kindly when not. You've developed a tone for it. Gentle, matter-of-fact, almost priest-like. It's not a lie, but it is a performance. You've learned people crave rhythm in their final moments. Something that sounds like assurance even when none exists. You try honoring their requests when possible. One man asked to face east. A woman requested her wedding dress. Another, a stinking drunkard with 3 teeth, demanded you spit on his grave so he wouldn't die too clean. You nodded. Never did it, but considered it. Some requests are stranger. One man wanted a chicken to hold. No one knew why. You gave him one. He smiled all the way to the block. You start categorizing them mentally, not formally, just for yourself. The shouters, the weepers, the stone-faced, the laughers, those who make awful jokes, those who say nothing at all. You remember the odd ones best. The woman reciting a shopping list under her breath. The priest who insisted on hearing your confession before accepting last rites. The soldier who saluted the crowd, then wet himself. These stick with you, not because they're tragic or meaningful, but because they're human. And human is harder to forget. You've had people try to bribe you, to look away, to loosen ropes, to miss on purpose. One offered land, another a ring you still keep in a drawer. You didn't take it seriously. There's no future in helping the already doomed. You nod, pretend to consider, then proceed as ordered. Not cruelly, just professionally. They wouldn't thank you for a slow death anyway. No one remembers the small mercies you do grant. Children are hardest. Not many, just a handful over the years, but enough to haunt the spaces between sleep. The law doesn't call them children once condemned. Enemy, traitor, witch, anything to make the hands on the rope feel cleaner. But when they look at you, they're just children, wide-eyed, too small, too stunned to cry. One asked for her doll, another if her mother would be watching. You said no. Hoped you were right. You try not to speak unnecessarily. Not for formality, for self-preservation. Words make things realer. The condemned will search your face for softness. If they find it, they'll use it. They'll tell you their stories, their versions, their mistakes. And you'll listen, because you're human. And humans crave stories, even awful ones. But afterward, you'll carry their voices into your shack, your dreams, the silences between axe swings. So you keep your mouth shut more now. Still, some stay with you, not because they deserved it, but because they carved notches in your mind. The man who said nothing but winked before kneeling. The merchant who smiled like he knew secrets you never would. The one who asked if you believed in ghosts. You didn't answer. He laughed like that was answer enough, then requested you whistle as you swung. You didn't, but the tune stuck in your head for days. There are those who believe they're innocent, truly, fiercely, eyes burning with conviction, voices steady, hands raised in protest until the end. Some curse the judge, some curse you. One woman called you a dog with hands. You didn't disagree. You try looking them in the eye when it happens, not from defiance, but so someone sees them die. Then there are the obviously guilty, the ones who grin as charges are read, who lean into the spectacle like it's entertainment. They frighten you most, not because they enjoy it, but because they understand it. They know they're part of something bigger than justice or punishment, feeding the crowd, fueling the machine. Some thank you, not mockingly, but genuinely, as if you've given them a stage, a final moment of clarity. You nod, but it sits poorly. You don't want gratitude. You want them gone. The worst aren't the furious or the fearful. It's the ones who forgive you. Without prompting, without pity, they look at you and say things like, "I know it's not your fault," or "You're just doing the job." First time it happened, you nodded. Second time, your stomach turned. Third time, you nearly wept. You don't like it. Forgiveness weighs more than blame. It's harder to carry. You'd rather be hated. Simpler that way. The worst part isn't their rage, it's their grace. The flicker of humanity in someone's eyes just before the fall. How a hand stops trembling when they accept the end. The terrible intimacy of steadying someone's shoulder as they kneel, knowing they'll never rise again. You touch no one in daily life. But here you press palms to the backs of necks. Here you whisper instructions. Here you offer the only human contact some will ever know again. And some know it as they go. Once, someone asked to sing. You said yes. They sang quietly, off-key, but with such trembling pride it made the crowd fall silent. You waited until the last note faded before raising the blade. Afterward, someone clapped, just once. You didn't turn to see who. You never learned the song's name, but sometimes you hum it without thinking. Lately, it's not just memories weighing you down. It's your body betraying you. Your hands, your breath, the way your knees refuse to bend as they once did. You've stood still too long, and now when movement is required, you feel the stiffness creeping in. You still show up, still swing true, but something's shifting in the wood beneath your feet, in the crowd's silence, in how the axe no longer rests easy in your grip. Your hands shake now, not always, just in mornings, just before storms, just after bad sleep, which is most nights. You try hiding it, pressing palms flat against tables, gripping mugs with both hands, blaming the cold. But the tremor starts in your knuckles, spreading like damp through stone. The first time it happened during an execution, you blamed the wind. The second time, you said nothing. The third, you saw a guard glance at your hands, then quickly away. He didn't speak. Didn't need to. It's not just your hands. Your knees ache. Your back tightens. The axe feels heavier. The scaffold stairs seem taller. You've started bracing yourself subtly as you walk, adjusting weight, keeping steps deliberate. You wake slower, stiff and dull, your breath taking longer to steady. You tell yourself it's age, normal, expected, but executioners aren't permitted to age. You're not some priest or merchant. No one wants to see the hangman grow old. You try compensating. Extra time sharpening blades. Practice swings before dawn. Keeping tools so polished you can see your reflection in the steel. But none of it matters when your grip slips. When you miss the timing by half a second. When your boot catches on a loose board and the crowd makes that sound. Not quite laughter, not quite disgust. The condemned notices. So do the magistrates. You finish the job cleanly, but hear the silence afterward. The kind people use to make decisions behind closed doors. You weren't always like this. You remember steady hands. Firm steps. Shoulders that could bear the axe's weight for hours. But that man feels distant now. You recall how he moved, how he stood, how he spoke, but not how he felt. That younger version was hungrier, less aware of what was being taken from him piece by piece with each execution. You've lost more than strength, you've lost attachment. The emotional walls you built are crumbling at the edges. Each death presses in more vividly now than ever before. The crowd sees it too. You notice their whispers, how they lean together when you ascend the scaffold. You catch fragments, old, slow, shaky. They still come, still cheer, still demand their show. But their expectations have sharpened, their tolerance thinned. You've become a performer who stayed on stage too long. They want cleaner spectacle, younger hands, a blade that doesn't hesitate. The guards no longer meet you at your door. They leave notes now, folded and signed, impersonal. The assignments continue, regular as ever, but there's a new tone to them. Brief, formal, as if already preparing for your replacement. The priest hasn't looked you in the eye for months. You pass him in the street, and he turns his head like he's contemplating something holy and far away. You used to get nods from the magistrate. Now it's just parchment, a name, a time, no questions, no instructions. They assume you remember how. That's the irony. You remember everything now. The movements, the pressure points, the exact weight distribution for each swing. But your body lags behind the knowledge. It resists. You've started rehearsing your own departure in your head. Not a speech, just a way to leave. You consider what to take. The whetstone, the small chest, maybe the ledger. You own little. No one in your position does. You imagine walking away. No fanfare, no ceremony. Just locking the door and vanishing like smoke. You don't expect a replacement to knock. They'll find their own tools. The town will provide. They always do. The man before you didn't leave cleanly. You never met him, just heard the stories. His hands failed, started missing, took to drink. One day he didn't show. They found him in a field with a broken bottle and rusted axe beside him. No one told you what became of the body. You think of him more often now, not as warning, just as pattern, a familiar ending. You'd hoped once there might be a pension, a quiet cottage somewhere, a life of fishing or reading or walking through woods where no one knew your name. But there's no retirement fund for men like you. No golden years. Just the slow decay of usefulness followed by silence. They don't honor executioners who retire. They erase them, like chalk marks wiped away after the lessons taught. You hear rumors. A younger man's been seen near the courthouse, asking questions about tools with the clerk. You don't seek confirmation. You already know. The guards speak to you less. The townspeople no longer lower their eyes when you pass. They look straight at you now. Not with fear, but impatience. As if wondering why you're still here. As if waiting for you to read the signs. You consider stopping before they ask, handing in the key, leaving on your terms. But even that feels performative now, like offering a gift no one wants. You imagine standing in the magistrate's office, explaining yourself. He'd nod, maybe offer token thanks. More likely, he'd already have a letter prepared, folded, sealed, ready. They've been planning your end longer than you have. You still show up, still swing when called, still clean the blade and wash the blood and say the small prayer you've always said when it's over. But you feel the margin shrinking. There's no room left for error. One slip, one stumble, one scream that lasts a heartbeat too long. And you'll be gone, not in disgrace, but in absence. Quietly, efficiently, forgotten. They tell you you'll be replaced. Quietly, efficiently, as if you never were. A month after your last job, they erect a monument to justice near the town square. White stone, tall, clean, etched with names of judges, magistrates, aldermen, men who wore robes, held gavels, signed papers in ink now faded. A plaque lists great trials, criminals brought to heel, laws passed in solemn halls behind doors you never entered. No mention of blocks or ropes or the men who made sentences final. You pass it sometimes, not on purpose. It's just near the market, where coins change hands and bread gets weighed, and no one remembers what you did last week. As long as the scaffold's clean, you glance at it briefly, then away. There's a statue on top, blindfolded, sword in one hand, scales in the other. She never held a whetstone, never scraped blood from floors. You used to wonder what people thought happened after verdicts, if they imagined justice descended from heavens like lightning, if they believed sentences fulfilled themselves, quick, painless, without sweat or labor or hands. You were the hands, the weight, the hinge no one looked at, but everyone relied on. You made it real, made it stick. Now they pretend you were never there. There's a new man now. You haven't seen his face, but you've noticed how people speak of him. Curious, not fearful, as if he's some novelty. Young, clean, well-spoken, perhaps, or just quiet enough that they haven't decided what to fear yet. You don't resent him. Everyone starts somewhere. You just hope he learns faster than you did, that he sharpens his own blades. Your house stands empty now, hearth cold, tools gone or boxed up. You took only necessities. Left the chair with the cracked leg, the cot with uneven slats, the ledger filled with names stretching too far back to reread. You lingered in the doorway before leaving, listening to the stillness, wondering if the house missed you already. It didn't. No farewell, no coin purse, no letter of gratitude. You stepped down as quietly as you stepped onto scaffolds, unnoticed, barely a sound. You pass the magistrate's hall, the door doesn't open. Past the chapel, the priest keeps preaching as if nothing changed. He's right, nothing has. Not really. You leave. Another takes the blade. The system continues. The ledger gets another page. The rope another knot. You consider writing someone, anyone, just to say you were here. But there's no one to send it to. And if there were, what would you say? That you served? That you obeyed? That you made clean work of dirty orders? That you witnessed the worst in men and still slept most nights? There's no poetry in that. No redemption. Just fact. The road ahead lies empty. You don't know where it leads. That used to frighten you. Now it feels like relief. You nod at travelers without speaking. No one recognizes you. No one recoils. The anonymity almost disorients, being just another man with sore knees and a pack on his back. You don't know how long it will last. Maybe forever. Maybe until someone asks your name and hears something familiar in your voice. You find yourself in a quiet grove beyond a forgotten village. There's a stump there, smooth from age, ringed by moss and fallen leaves. It reminds you of the block. You sit just for a moment, not to reflect, just to rest. Birds sing like they've never heard of gallows. Wind moves through trees like it has better places to be. You close your eyes and listen. When you open them, you notice your hands resting in your lap, steady at last. No tremor, just old hands, wrinkled, calloused, finally at peace. You feel the ache in your back, the tightness in your shoulders, but not like punishment anymore. Just age, just the weight of having endured something no one ever thanked you for. You reach into your pack and remove the cloth-wrapped bundle, lighter now, familiar. You unfold it slowly, like a priest handling relics. Inside lies the axe head, not your first, that one's long gone. but one that served you well. Cleaned often, sharpened religiously, trusted. You cradle it in both hands, not like a weapon, but a memory. It catches the light gently, without malice. You run a thumb along its flat surface, never the edge. You don't need the edge anymore. Then you stand and walk to a hollow near the tree line. Not a grave exactly, just a space where earth seems soft and grass grows undisturbed. You kneel slowly, carefully, and place the axe head there, wrapped once more. Not buried, just left. You don't mark the spot. Don't say a prayer. Don't look back. You were never the face of justice. Never the voice. Never the pen. You were the hand behind the curtain, the silent pressure that made the machine function. Necessary. Feared. Forgotten. You wore no robes. Sat in no judgments. Asked no whys. You just made the sentences real. And now that you're gone, the platform still stands. The rope still sways. The crowd still gathers. The seasons turn without you now. Winter frost creeps across the scaffold where another man stands. Spring rains wash the blood into grooves your boots once wore. Summer sun bakes the wood until it smells like the shack you left behind. You walk roads that have no names, sleep in ditches when innkeepers cross themselves at your approach, trade labor for bread when farmers are desperate enough to overlook whatever they sense about you. Your hands still twitch sometimes, not from tremors now, but from muscle memory. You'll be stirring porridge over a campfire, and suddenly your fingers arrange themselves into the grip for an axe that no longer exists. You wake certain you hear the scaffold creaking beneath your feet, only to open your eyes to forest canopy or barn rafters. The wine helps less now, not because you drink less, you don't, but because the past clings harder than the alcohol can dissolve. You hear things on the road. A miller's daughter whispers about the new executioner in your old town. How he wears black gloves and never speaks to the crowd. A merchant complains the hangings take longer now, that the new man hesitates. You nod and say nothing. You know how long it took you to stop hesitating. How much longer it took to stop regretting that you'd stopped. At a crossroads tavern, a guardsman boasts about the old headsman who retired. Shook like a leaf at the end. He laughs, ill sloshing. Took 3 swings for a simple thief. You sit in the corner, put up, and wonder if he ever watched you work, if he'd recognize your face. Probably not. You were never the spectacle, just the mechanism behind it. You dream differently now, not of the dead, but of the tools. The axe floating just beyond reach, the rope coiling around your wrists like a lover, the sword buried to its hilt in earth that bleeds. You wake with your hands clenched, not around imagined hilts, but as if trying to hold on to something already gone. The flask helps, but the taste has turned sour. You drink anyway because the alternative is remembering too clearly. Your feet develop their own wisdom, carrying you away from towns large enough to need professional executioners, toward places where justice is makeshift and temporary. You take work where you can find it. Mending fences, clearing ditches, any labor that requires more muscle than conversation. They don't ask your name in these places. You don't offer. You become the traveler, the worker, sometimes just a grunt and a pointing finger toward what needs doing. The coins you save dwindle faster than expected. You'd forgotten how much the town provided. Not just the shack, but the firewood, the occasional side of pork, the whetstones and linens, and all the small things you never had to buy. Now every copper matters. You consider selling the ring that one condemned man gave you. A cheap thing, really, the stone cloudy and chipped. But your fingers won't cooperate when you try to remove it from its hiding place in your pack. It stays. Winter finds you in a shepherd's hut, hired to watch flocks while the real shepherd winters with his daughter in town. The sheep smell better than the shack ever did. The work is simple. Keep them from wolves, from cliffs, from their own stupidity. At night you listen to the wind through the thatch and realize it's the first time in years no one expects you to kill anything. The relief is so sudden it aches. You carve a new handle for the shepherd's axe, not an executioner's tool, just something for chopping wood. Your hands remember how to shape the curve where palm meets wood, how to sand until the grain shines. It's good work, honest. When the shepherd returns in spring, he runs his fingers along the smooth haft and nods approvingly. You realize it's the first praise you've received in years that didn't come with blood on it. The road takes you east, then south, then nowhere in particular. You grow leaner, your hair longer, your face browner from sun. People begin looking at you differently, not with fear or disgust, but with the mild disinterest reserved for strangers who pose no obvious threat. You're just another wandering worker now, another set of hands for hire. The realization should comfort you more than it does. At a market near a river, you overhear two women gossiping about an execution gone wrong in some distant city. The rope snapped, the crowd rioted, the executioner was torn apart. You freeze with a heel of bread halfway to your mouth. The women don't notice. They've already moved on to discussing a baker's infidelity. You wonder if that executioner was someone you knew, if you passed each other at some crossroads long ago, each recognizing the other's profession without a word spoken. Probably not. The world is larger than you remember. Summer brings you to a vineyard where the foreman doesn't ask questions as long as the work gets done. You prune vines and crush grapes, and try not to think about how the fermenting juice smells like old blood. The work is hard but simple, the pay enough to keep your belly full and your flask half full. At night, the other workers sing songs you don't know, tell stories you weren't there for. You sit apart, not because they exclude you, but because you've forgotten how to join in. The harvest festival comes. There's dancing, drinking, a bonfire that lights up the hillside. Someone presses a cup of new wine into your hands, sweet and sharp and alive on your tongue. A woman with laugh lines around her eyes asks where you're from. You open your mouth and realize you have no answer that matters anymore. You shrug. She laughs and pulls you toward the fire where others are dancing. For one night, you let the music and the wine and the warmth convince you that you could belong here. Morning comes with headaches and regrets. You pack your few belongings before dawn, leaving the last of your pay on the foreman's table. The road is kinder than people, anyway. It asks no questions, demands no stories, judges no pasts. You walk until the vineyard is just a smudge on the horizon, then further still. Autumn finds you in the foothills, helping a charcoal burner tend his mounds. The work is smoky and solitary, which suits you. The burner is a man of few words and fewer questions. You learn the rhythm of the fires, when to bank them, when to let them breathe, how to read the smoke's color. It's not so different from preparing pyres, though you don't say that aloud. The burner gives you a knife when he notices you whittling sticks by firelight. It's not a fine blade, but it holds an edge. You carve a bird from a piece of oak, clumsy and lopsided, but recognizable. The burner nods when he sees it. That night, he leaves an extra portion of stew by your bedroll. It's the closest either of you come to saying thank you. Winter returns, and with it a cough that settles deep in your chest. The burner lets you stay in his hut through the worst of it, though there's little work to be done. You repay him by mending his tools, sharpening his blades, carving a new handle for his splitting maul. The bird you made sits on the rough shelf above the door, watching over the single room with its uneven eyes. Sometimes when the wind howls through the cracks in the walls, you imagine it's the scaffold groaning underfoot again. Then the burner snorts in his sleep, or a log shifts in the fire, and you remember where you are. The cough lingers into spring, stubborn as guilt. The burner doesn't complain, but you see the way he edges away when your hacking wakes him, how he leaves the door open after you've shared the space. You take the hint. One morning when the frost has just begun to loosen its grip, you pack your things. The knife, the half-finished carving of a dog, the ring still hidden in its pouch. The burner watches, but says nothing until you're at the door. Then, road's muddy still. It's not quite an invitation, not quite a request. You nod and set your pack down again. You stay until the wildflowers bloom. The cough fades with the last of the winter chill. When you finally leave, the burner presses a wrapped bundle into your hands. Dried meat, a wedge of cheese, a small flask of something stronger than wine. You try to give him the knife back. He shakes his head. The bird stays on the shelf. You walk away without looking back because that's the only way you know how to leave. The road takes you down from the hills, through villages too small to have gallows, past farms where justice is meted out with sticks and stones if it comes at all. You work when you can, sleep rough when you must, Drink less than you used to, but more than you should. The ring stays in its pouch. The knife grows sharper with use. The world moves on around you, indifferent as ever. At a ferry crossing, you hear travelers talking about a plague in the cities to the south. Whole towns emptying, bodies piled in the streets, no one left to bury them properly. One man jokes that they'll need more executioners soon, with all the looting and lawbreaking. His companion laughs. You stare at the river's brown water and think about the weight of a shovel in your hands versus an axe. The ferryman calls for fares. You step aboard, heading north. The northern road takes you to a fishing village where the sea crashes against black rocks and the air tastes like salt and rotting kelp. No one asks about the scars on your hands here. The fishermen have their own. Rope burns, hook punctures, palms weathered by decades of hauling nets. You trade labor for a cot in the loft above the bait shack, your nights lulled by the creaking of boats at their moorings. At first, the sea unsettles you. Its constant motion, its refusal to hold still like the solid scaffolds and blocks you once knew. But in time, you find rhythm in the tides, the way they advance and retreat with more certainty than any execution schedule. The gull's cries replace the crowd's jeers. The fish scales glittering on the docks sparkle cleaner than blood ever did. You mend nets for old Tomas, whose eyes have grown too cloudy for fine work. His fingers guide yours through the knots, his patience endless despite your clumsiness. Like this, he murmurs, looping the twine in patterns that resemble the hangman's knots you once tied, but softer, meant to hold rather than choke. The nets tear often. You repair them. They tear again. The work never ends, but neither does the sea's bounty. Spring brings herring runs that keep the whole village awake for days. You join the gutting tables, your knife skills earning approving nods from the fishwives. There's art to this, slicing bellies cleanly, removing entrails with minimal waste, your blade moving with precision you thought you'd forgotten. The guts go into barrels for bait. The heads become soup. Nothing is wasted. You find comfort in this efficiency, so different from the wastefulness of death. One evening, as you scrape scales from your arms, the village priest approaches. Not the young, nervous type from your old life, but a grizzled man with seaweed tangled in his beard who blesses the boats each morning. He studies your hands before speaking. Tomas says you've a talent for carving. You glance at the crude fish you'd whittled during breaks. A pike, a salmon, now a half-finished seal pup. Passes the time. The priest nods. We've saint statue needs restoring. The damp's eaten half her face. He pauses. Pays in meals, not coin. The chapel smells of wax and dried fish. The statue stands in a shadowed alcove, her features eroded into something barely human. You run your fingers over the ruined wood, feeling where the grain still holds strong beneath the rot. For the first time in years, your hands don't shake. Work progresses slowly. You carve in the quiet hours before dawn, when the chapel sits empty. The saint's new face emerges gradually. Not young, not old, but somehow outside of time. Her expression isn't the blank serenity of most statues. There's weariness around the eyes, a set to the jaw that suggests hard-won peace. You don't realize you've carved your own face until the priest remarks on it. Looks like she's lived, is all he says, running a hand over the finished work. He pays you in smoked eel and a flask of something stronger than wine. Summer storms keep the boats ashore for a week. You pass the time helping rebuild the Widow Marek's fence, the post hammering reminding you of stakes you once secured. She's a sharp-tongued woman with salt-bleached hair and a missing finger, unimpressed by men in general and you in particular. Her gratitude comes in the form of a wool coat, patched but sturdy, and a warning not to let the goats near her vegetable plot. The village children initially avoid you, as children do. But one afternoon, you carve a whistle from a scrap of driftwood. When you demonstrate its shrill cry, a boy barely higher than your knee forgets to be afraid. Soon there's a line of them, bringing you shells and smooth stones in exchange for tiny dolphins, seabirds, even a mermaid with a fish's tail. Their mothers watch from a distance at first, then closer when no harm comes of it. You dream of the sea now instead of scaffolds. In one recurring dream, you walk along the seabed, your pockets full of carved wooden figures that float upward when released, bobbing toward a surface you can no longer reach. You wake with salt on your lips, unsure if it's sweat or tears or the ever-present ocean spray. Tomas dies in his sleep when the first frost comes. The village mourns, then gathers to divide his belongings. To your surprise, they give you his bait knife, the one you've been sharpening for him all season. Its bone handle fits your palm as if grown there. That night, you carve Tomas's face into a piece of ship timber and set it adrift at high tide. The current takes it swiftly out to sea. Winter brings fewer boats to mend, more time for carving. The priest suggests you try your hand at a new Madonna for the chapel's alcove. You hesitate. Sacred work feels beyond you. But the wood they provide is smooth and golden, begging to be shaped. You work slowly, the Madonna emerging gradually from the grain. A sturdy woman with a fisherman's shoulders and eyes that seem to follow you around the room. The child in her arms holds a tiny wooden boat. The unveiling coincides with the spring equinox. The whole village crowds into the chapel, their damp wool smelling of peat smoke and brine. You stand in the back, ready to slip out if the work displeases. But when the cloth comes off, there's a collective intake of breath, then silence. Not the silence of a crowd holding its breath, but something warmer. The widow Merrick is the first to approach, tracing the Madonna's folded apron with her four-fingered hand before lighting a candle at its base. Afterward, the priest finds you on the docks. They say you were an executioner, he says, not unkindly. The word hangs between you like a fish on a line. You watch the horizon where sea meets sky. Once, he nods, following your gaze. We've all been something else. He leaves you with a bottle of blackberry wine and an invitation to carve saints for the other villages along the coast. Summer returns, and with it a traveling merchant who pauses too long at your whittling. His eyes narrow at the particular way you hold your knife. You're him, he murmurs. The headsman from the southern provinces. You brace for the usual recoil, the crossed fingers, the sudden need to be elsewhere. But the merchant just nods. Heard you disappeared. He buys 3 carved seabirds at double the price, promising they'll sell well in the capital. News comes sporadically to the village. A bad harvest inland, a noble's marriage, rumors of war. One evening, a fish trader brings word of a plague in the cities to the south. They're dying faster than they can bury them, he says around a mouthful of bread. Even the executioners are dropping. The villagers make protective signs. You excuse yourself to check on the nets. That night, you walk to the point where the waves crash loudest. The ring from your old life sits heavy in your pocket, the one you never sold, never threw away. You hold it up to the moonlight, the cloudy stone catching the light dimly. Then you fling it seaward with all the strength in your ruined shoulder. The waves swallow it without a trace. Autumn storms keep the boats in harbor for days at a time. You teach some of the children how to carve simple shapes. Boats, fish, the occasional clumsy gull. They chatter as they work, their small hands surprisingly deft. The widow Merrick watches from her fence line, her expression unreadable. Later, she brings you a pot of mussel stew and stays to share it. Neither of you speak much, but the silence is comfortable, broken only by the crackling of the fire and the distant cries of gulls. Winter comes early that year, icing the docks and driving the villagers indoors. You spend the long nights carving by firelight, not saints now, but the villagers themselves. Old Tomas mending his nets, the priest blessing the boats, the widow Merrick scowling at her goats, the children with their pockets full of shells. You give the figures away as gifts, receiving in return smoked fish, mended socks, the occasional bottle of something strong enough to warm your bones. On the longest night of the year, the village gathers in the chapel to light candles against the darkness. The Madonna you carved watches over the proceedings, her painted robes glowing in the candlelight. When the singing starts, rough sea shanties adapted for the season, you find yourself joining in. The words are unfamiliar, but the melody rises and falls like the tide, easy to follow. Afterward, the widow Merrick presses a small package into your hands, a new knife, its handle carved with intricate knotwork. For the carving, she mutters before stalking off. You test the blade against your thumb. It's sharp enough to shave with. Spring arrives with a rush of melting snow and returning birds. The village prepares for the fishing season, mending nets and tarring hulls. You're helping reline old Tomas's boat when the priest finds you. Got a letter from down coast, he says. They want a St. Peter for their new chapel. He eyes the boat. If you're interested, you consider the half-finished figurehead you've been carving for the bow, a mermaid with the Widow Marek's sharp features. The wood curls away from your blade like it's eager to take shape. Out in the harbor, the tide is coming in, steady and sure as a heartbeat. I'm interested, you say, and reach for your tools.